right, well, good morning and welcome. I'm Christina Henderson. I'm the president of the University of Montana Entrepreneurship Club, and I'm happy to welcome you this morning to a Q&A session with Jim Messina. It may seem a bit counterintuitive that a club devoted to business entrepreneurship would invite someone whose career has primarily focused on politics, but I think once you hear about Mr. Messina's career, we're going to get a master class today in technology, management, marketing, strategy, and a lot of the lessons I think that he'll have to share with us will be as applicable to the business world in a fast-growing company as they would be to someone in politics, campaigns, or social entrepreneurship. This event is also being videotaped by the Missoula Community Access Television as part of its Media Assistance Grants program to nonprofit organizations, so there will be a recording available after the event as well. And I'll ask the questions for the first portion of the program, and then we'll open it up, so if you in the audience have anything you would like to ask, you can shout it out. I'll repeat the question so that it's on tape, and then Mr. Messina can answer. So I would like to give a little bit of background on our guest today. Jim Messina is a 2013 UM Distinguished Alumni Award Recipient, so he'll be receiving that award later today. He was recently named Political Strategist of the Year by the Political Consultants Association for his role as campaign manager for President Barack Obama's re-election in 2012. He's a native of Boise, Idaho, and earned degrees from the UM in 1993 and 2009. As a UM senior, he ran the successful re-election campaign for Missoula Mayor Dan Kemmis, and later served as Chief of Staff for U.S. Senator Max Baucus of Montana. Prior to his selection as 2012 campaign manager, Mr. Messina was Deputy Chief of Staff in the White House, and he has also founded the Messina Group, a consulting firm that advises corporations, politicians, and nonprofits using the technology and grassroots lessons pioneered by the Obama campaign. Please join me in welcoming Jim Messina.
Thank you.
Could you please first tell us a little bit about your background, where you came from, and how you ended up at the University of Montana?
Absolutely. So going to the University of Montana was probably the most important decision I ever made. I think all the things I've been able to do were because I went here and had amazing professors. And I grew up in Denver and then Boise, Idaho. Went to high school there and knew desperately I wanted to get out of Boise. And so I started looking at universities. I wanted to be a journalism major. The U of M, of course, has an amazing journalism school. And so I decided to come here. I'd never been to Montana until the first day of my freshman year, where I arrived. I didn't know anybody and fell into this amazing atmosphere and a bunch of people who wanted to help me grow. And I was just remembering when we were getting ready, I took history of rock and roll in this room my freshman year, which I regret to say I got a B in for some unapparent reason. Yeah, I have great memories here.
So now that you've gone on and done all these other things that you've done, what are the advantages of being from Montana if you're going to go and compete in a world like DC?
Look, I think that people in Montana have an absolute leg up because of the size and because of the quality of people who teach here and live around here. I had professors who, continually gave me internship credits. I took 6 years to graduate because I was always leaving to go work on a campaign, go work in the legislature. My professors thought that what I learned outside the classroom was just as important as what I learned inside of it. And the day I graduated from college, I was named political director of the state Democratic Party, and it was because I'd already done all these things. And I look at my friends who graduated from bigger schools, and they just kind of get lost sometimes. And I had a group of people who thought it was their job to help me attain my dreams. And I was able to do that, and I just don't think you get that. The other thing, especially in DC, no one's ever asked me where I went to school. No one's ever said, do you have an Ivy League degree? People just say, are you good? Are you a person of your word? Can you help me? And I think the relationships and experiences I got here at U of M gave me a huge competitive advantage.
Why did you get into politics?
I've never not been in politics. When I was in 4th grade, I wrote a paper about what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I said the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos or the campaign manager to the president. And after John Elway screwed me out of the purse thing, I only wanted to do politics. And so even in high school, I was trying to figure out how to get paid doing politics. And, I say to people all the time, people say, how do I get your career? And I say to them all the time, just figure out what you love and go do that for a career, because I haven't worked one day in my life, because I get to do things. People pay me to do what I would do for free anyway, which is amazingly awesome. And someday they're going to wake up and stop paying me, because I would do it for free.
Is there a reason why you wanted to be a campaign manager as opposed to being elected yourself?
Yeah, because I think actually doing this yourself is terrifying. And I thought very early, when I was at U of M, I elected a couple people to city council and the state senate and then the mayor. And I realized I could elect 10 people who shared my values instead of just elect myself. And I do, Max Baucus is like my father. And I see the stress it puts on his family and, the things he goes through. And that's just something I didn't ever want to do. I love being the guy behind the guy.
I would like to talk some about a Business Week article that quoted you as saying that your role as campaign manager was most like that of a CEO of a fast-growing company. How do you think that's true?
So I was the first employee of the Obama campaign in April of 2011. 16 months later, we had 5,000 staff. We had offices in all 50 states. We had 14 different departments that reported to me. And we'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, but I went on a grand tour before the campaign started and interviewed every CEO and kind of interesting political figure or business figure that I thought could teach things. And one of the smartest ones who ended up serving as my kind of management coach was Eric Schmidt, at the time CEO of Google. And Eric said to me all the time, stop thinking you're a campaign manager. You're a CEO. You're running $1 billion company. Act like it. And those lessons were very hard for a guy without business experience. But it was true that a presidential campaign, I'd run 10 Senate races. A presidential campaign is just way bigger. We raised and spent $1.1 billion. We had all of this kind of systems that you really had to kind of pay attention to. And in many ways, it really was a business. In other ways, it wasn't. In other ways, it was still a campaign for a once-in-a-generation candidate. But it was an interesting mix of both, and I think it was the biggest professional challenge I'll ever go through.
So I would like to dig in a little bit to those specific meetings.
Yeah.
Who did you meet with? What did you talk about? And what did they teach you that you then applied to the campaign?
So some of the most memorable meetings, I met with Steve Jobs before he passed and had 2 amazing meetings with him. The first meeting, in his typical brusque manner, he said, I think everyone at the White House should be fired. And I was like, well, this meeting's going to suck. But then he started just telling me really good advice, and he made me a poster that said, evolve or die. And it was a very good reminder to me, because the '08 Obama campaign had such history, right? Whether you like him or don't like him, it was a historic campaign. But in 2012, everything had changed in technology. On election day 2008, we sent out one tweet because we thought it was a stupid technology that would never go anywhere. 4 years later, it's predominant. Facebook had grown 10 times the size. The iPhone wasn't introduced till the middle of the Obama campaign in '08. So all those things had kind of taken over. So we had to kind of forget some of our own history, not our values, but some of our history, and reimagine the campaign. And the other thing he said to me very wisely, he held up his cell phone and said, this is going to be the most important device, except for the internal combustion engine ever invented. And everything you do in 16 months has to be on this device, or you'll be irrelevant. Which turned out to be the most true thing anyone said to me. I sat with Steven Spielberg, who talked to me about programming content for that device. And he said to me, Jim, his lesson was kind of the same lesson. You have to reimagine the campaign. And he said, the first time you guys were the 1965 Rolling Stones. And I said, I wasn't born then. What was that about? And he laughed and said, they were really sexy and cool. He said, the second time, when you run for re-election, you're a touring band that has to sell tickets. And he said, you have to figure out how to make the 2012 campaign sexy again. And he paused and said, and I know you, and you're not sexy. and so we talked about some of the things to do that. Obviously, Eric Schmidt flew to Chicago every 10 days or 2 weeks and spent time with me. But probably the wisest CEO I met was a woman named Anna Wintour, who is the CEO of Vogue magazine. And she was brilliant in figuring out how to help us piece through how to raise and spend $1 billion. She said to me very early, you're going to change your logo. And I said, why don't we change our logo? Everyone knows our logo. And she handed me a spreadsheet and said, because if you change your logo, everyone will have to buy the new t-shirt. And here's how much you will make. We ended up doing $43 million in t-shirt sales. We ended up doing our own fashion line that she curated. And then she called me and said, will you come roll out the fashion line? And I said, I don't know if you've met me, but I'm not fashionable. And she said, no, but Scarlett Johansson will introduce you. And I was like, I'm so in. And so we did our fashion line and made like $20-some million, all because we kind of reimagined what a campaign was. And of the $1.1 billion we raised, $690 million of it was given to us on our cell phones, by people on their cell phones. And so all the kind of lessons we put together were really transformative and things we just didn't do at all in the 2008 campaign.
So maybe talk a little bit more about what it's like inside a presidential campaign. Because I think that those of us who are average citizens have one impression of what it's like. But what is it really like?
You know, it's a great question. I spent a long time thinking I never wanted to work in presidential campaigns because I loved Senate races. You got to know the candidates, you got to be very good friends, you could really affect them. And I had seen all these books and read all the books about the infighting in the campaigns. And partially because of the president, he just didn't allow any of that. But the 2012 campaign was incredibly pressure-filled, right? Because when we started, the New York Times Magazine put him on the cover, and with this famous cover that says, "Is Obama toast?" And their computer models gave him a 17% chance to win because of the unemployment rate, because of the economy, because where we were. You know, unlike the other campaigns I had run, every single day on cable television, someone was criticizing something I was doing or the campaign was doing. And just the kind of ubiquitous coverage was just, you know, unparalleled. I'd gotten a little sense of it in the White House, but the campaign was just kind of that, full throttle. And so it was really important to stay focused on your plan and not be pulled off by today's coverage and understand what you were doing. The hardest example of that was the first debate. We lost the first debate worse than any presidential candidate had ever lost a debate before. And, you know, he showed amazing leadership into saying to us, hey, this one's on me. Don't change the plan. We're winning. Let's just go execute and all fix the second debate. And you guys don't change the plan. And the entire world came on top of us screaming, oh my God, change the plan. And to just stay calm and execute there was the hardest thing we'd ever done. But, you know, it was a reflection of his leadership.
Excuse me. So I read an account that on election day, David Axelrod rallied the troops by saying, don't worry, if he loses, everyone will blame Messina, and if he wins, we all win. And everybody laughed. It's a joke, but there's always a kernel of truth in humor, too.
Right.
So how much did you feel that the success of the campaign rested on your shoulders as campaign manager, and how did you deal with the pressure?
Red wine. You know, it's funny, 10 days before the election, the president called me and said, will you fly to Milwaukee tomorrow to see me? And I said, you know, 5,000 staff, we're a little busy here in Chicago. Could we do this on the phone? And he said, no, I want to talk to you. I want to ask you a question. And so I flew there the next morning, and he pulled me aside. And I remember that morning he was the opening act for him that morning was Katy Perry, the actress, or the singer. And I was talking to Katy Perry because at the time I thought she and I might have destiny together. And so he pulled me aside and he said, Jim, I want to ask you my question. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, but first I want to remind you that if we lose in 10 days, the world's only going to blame two people. It's like you and me. And I said, yes, sir, I understand what it's going to do to my career. And he said, so my question to you is just this. This morning, the Gallup poll has me down 4 points. The CNN poll has me tied. New York Times has me down 1. And he said, what does your computer model say? We ran 66,000 computer simulations of the election every night for 14 months. And I said to him, you're going to win with 332 electoral votes. It's not going to be close. And he said, okay, Jim, here's my question. Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure you're right? Because no one has any data, anything like that. And I said, Mr. President, I slept 8 hours last night. We're going to be fine. And he looked at me and said, you better be right. And he said, I'll see you in 9 days. And so 9 days later on election night, after all the news agencies declared him the winner, that they called and said, he wants to see you. He won't start celebrating until you tell him he had won. Because, John Kerry had started to celebrate. Al Gore had done this. So he said to everyone, no party till Messina gets here. And I will never forget, I finally walk in, the place is very calm. And he pulled me into his private room in the hotel. And he said, the man from Montana here to deliver me some news. And I said, congratulations, Mr. President, you won with 332 electoral votes. And I paused and said, and I was right. And he burst out laughing, and that was the first moment I didn't feel pressure in 16 months.
How did you do that? What did you do? How did you create a data analytics system that could predict that?
We early on decided we were going to kind of make the campaign be about three things. The most important, of course, was the narrative and his story and where he had inherited the economy and where he was taking it. That narrative was incredibly important. Bill Clinton said to me very early, all presidential campaigns are always about the future, and the candidate who wins the battle for the future wins the election. And that turned out to be exactly true. The second thing was we needed to make the electorate look more like America and less like, older and white. And we needed young people to vote, we needed minorities to vote. And third, to do both those first two things, we needed to revolutionize the way we dealt with technology and data. And we thought we could use data to, in the end, build a very strong relationship between us and our supporters and give them data on their friends and family to organize their friends and family. And so we kind of pulled all the various systems, census tract data, commercially available data we had garnered on our own, and built for the first time in American politics a true database that treated you like you instead of just a voter number. And we knew a whole bunch about you. And then we opened all that up, open sourced all of it, and said to our friends and supporters, use this data to figure out how to persuade your friends. And we built 114 different applications for the internet and for people's phones to allow them to organize their friends and family. And one of them, the most successful one, which now a bunch of corporations are trying to copy, allowed us to go in and look at your Facebook friends and match it with our data and say to you, okay, here's your 5 best friends who are undecided. You contact them. In the final 96 hours of the campaign, 4.3 million people did that. And of their friends, 67.6% of their friends went from undecided to supporting Obama. We became the first president since Nixon in 72 to win a majority of the undecided in the last 4 days, in part because we were running against a not very good opponent, but also because we had people's friends and family authenticate to their friends it was okay to vote for this guy. I'm doing it, you can too. And if you think about to your entrepreneurial stuff, in a commercial setting, there are so many different sources of information people now get. When you and I were growing up, everyone got their news from NBC, ABC, and CBS. Now, 16 different people at night control the network or political news. And the number 1 rated network in America in the recent sweeps period was Univision, which says something about the share of people's audience. And so all those things make it even more important what your friends and family say to you about which movie you're going to go see, about who you're going to vote for, about which pair of shoes you're going to buy. And so we built technology to help you do that.
How did you lead that number of people, manage that amount of money in the midst of so much change in in our current media system where everything reverberates constantly 24 hours a day? What was your leadership strategy to be CEO of that company?
Well, first you had to delegate, right? No one can run that campaign. We had kind of a governing council. I had three amazingly tough deputies, these three women who are, I think, the most talented people in politics. And we split the campaign in thirds, and each of them ran a third. And then my job was to set a strategic vision to deal with the president, to solve political problems, and then try to keep us, on a path to raise and spend $1 billion in the ways that make sense. The easiest thing to do when you have $1 billion is to waste it. And so we literally counted the pens in the back room. We were going to be very frugal. Because in the middle of this, the Supreme Court made the Citizens United Supreme Court case, which allowed unlimited spending. And one billionaire in Las Vegas spent $93 million of his own money against us. And so when we were doing that kind of changed all the rules in the middle of the campaign. And so we had to kind of deal with that. And so spending money became really, really crucial and careful on how we did it.
I'd like to go back a little bit in your history. First of all, have you ever lost an election?
Not one that I've been the campaign manager of.
Yeah.
I've consulted on races that didn't win.
And how many campaigns have you managed?
That's a really good question. I tried to figure this out recently. I think over 50.
Over 50, and you've never lost. And it was interesting to me that you sometimes worked for real underdog candidates. So I lived in Minnesota actually when Paul Wellstone was there in office, and you joined his campaign in '90 when you were in college.
I was an unpaid intern. Yeah.
So you were here in Montana. How did you end up in Minnesota working for Paul Wellstone?
He came to give a political science lecture here, and I kind of fell in love with him. And at the time we were on a quarter system, and a lot of Montana kids went to Minnesota to work in the corn factories. So I volunteered in the campaign, and at night worked in the corn factory. And one day I was so tired, I wasn't paying attention and put my hand in the corn machine. This pinky doesn't straighten out anymore. This is my reminder of the 1990 Paul Wellstone campaign, that you can work your way into whatever you want. And I was just an intern. I wasn't paid, but it was an amazing experience because it was the first campaign that, I fell in love with a candidate, which turned out to be a dangerous thing when it's your profession, but it was a great way to start. And I came back to school and was like, I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to go work on campaigns. And a bunch of political science professors gave me internship credits to do it.
So maybe you could explain for those who might not know that campaign, how Paul Wellstone was a real underdog and how he won. And I'd maybe interested in hearing your opinion on how does the underdog win? Because you worked for a number of them, but they were still ultimately successful. So obviously you know how to pick a winner, but sometimes you pick the long shot candidate.
Yeah, if you think of Wellstone started when he was down 38 points. I worked and helped John Tester when he ran in '06. And when he was in the primary very early, he trailed his primary opponent by 32 points and won. In the first poll we did in Iowa in 2007, Barack Obama trailed Hillary Clinton 41-3 in Iowa and ended up winning Iowa. All three of those candidates have one big thing in common, which is a ability to attract people to their cause, ability to understand exactly who they are and believe who they are and bring people to them who want to put their hopes and dreams into that cause. The Tester, Obama, and Wellstone campaigns were causes, they weren't campaigns. They were people saying, we have to do this together. And that's the best kind of campaign to work on because it becomes more than a campaign, it becomes, a calling. And those are, the most fun campaigns I've ever had.
So if we have our own cause that we want to spread far and wide, what advice would you give about spreading it, about marketing, about grassroots, about technology that could apply to us?
So I just helped roll out the Man of Steel movie. And so it was fun to see whether the techniques that we use in campaign could be transferable. We also did Pacific Rim movie, and I learned some valuable things in both those things. Again, what consumer decisions are completely different than they were even 5 years ago. And making technology a piece of whatever you do is absolutely crucial. I don't care if you're selling cookies in the back at a bake sale. You know, you have to use technology to help you build a better connection with your consumer. And that's true across the platform. The second thing is be very platform neutral, which has completely changed. In 2008, everything we did was on BarackObama.com. In 2012, we had literally whole departments who just did Facebook, just did Twitter. You know, I'd never heard of this website before I agreed to put 10 full-time staffers on it, called Pinterest, which is the fastest growing website for women. And we ended up putting a bunch of Michelle Obama stuff on there and selling millions of dollars in fashion because we did Michelle Obama, and I never heard about it. We decided to put the president on this website called Reddit. And the day before, my team came to me and said, Jim, we got to do Reddit. And I'm like, excellent, what's Reddit? And they said, oh, it's this huge website. Everyone knows about it. And I said, well, I'm kind of technology savvy. I've never heard of it. So we did a little research, and the next day we decided to put Obama on it. So right before he goes on, the president calls me and says, Jim, I've never heard of this thing. Are you sure about this? And I said, you've never heard of Reddit? Come on. And, 5 million people got on, crashed the website. 30,000 people registered to vote in the first 10 minutes. I mean, it was just a huge success. And that was a good lesson in being very neutral about the platform and really going to where people are. And I think it's true in the consumer culture as well.
Is that your criteria for deciding? Because there's so many different channels, and they're always expanding for technology and how you can get your message out. Was whether people were there the main criteria, or what criteria did you choose?
We had two criteria. Number one, whether or not we could use it to move our message, because you can chase rabbits all the time, and it doesn't make sense unless you can move the message to your target groups. The second thing was, is it true with our values? Is it, we said all the time, is it Obama-ish? And we decided Pinterest and Reddit were. People tried to get us to invest in a NASCAR, which would have been kind of cool, but in the end, it didn't move our message to the right people, so we didn't do that. So we really kind of looked at those opportunities and had to make some choices. I think in the end, we made as many mistakes as we made right decisions, but we had data to make all those decisions, and that's another crucial point.
Tell me about marketing and the campaign. How did you settle on messages? What was your overall marketing strategy? How important is marketing in this day and age? You've got a campaign to win and a business to launch.
I think in business it's obviously very important. In a presidential campaign, it's a little bit different because to your earlier question, there's so much ubiquitous coverage of the presidential campaign. People really do get a very good sense of these candidates and who they are as people. We always thought we had two challenges, which is first to explain our vision for this economy and where we were taking the country, and to second, to make sure people understood that our opponent's vision was taking us right back to the same failed policies that got us in the past. And if we weren't moving those two messages, I literally sat down at the end of every day and looked at those two things. I very early sat down with George Bush's campaign manager, who's a brilliant guy, and he said to me, your job is two things: making sure you spend every dollar wisely and making sure you stay on your core objectives. And that turned out to be the most true advice anyone ever gave me.
When you look back at your career and maybe your days as a student working on campaigns and your early career running campaigns, what were the lessons that you learned early on and the experiences that you had early on that set you up for your future success?
It's embarrassing but true. I've been running a Missoula City Council race for 20 years. Like that grassroots organizing, the ability to count every person, the ability to build relationships, to figure out who's on your Christmas card list, who who lives in Ward 6 of the Missoula City Council. that's what we built in the Obama campaign. We just did it on steroids. And I think the lessons I learned here were incredibly important. And then, Montana is not a Democratic state, although you have 2 U.S. senators and a governor who's a Democrat. Not a Republican state, although you have a legislature that's Republican. It's really more of a nonpartisan state. And those lessons served me really well as I went around the country. Because my second paid job in politics, I was hired to run legislative races in eastern Montana. And I showed up with a tasteful mullet. I had a nice mullet. And I had only one pair of shoes, my red Chuck Taylor Converse All-Stars. And I was running state senate races in Glendive and Miles City. And I remember thinking later I learned incredibly valuable lessons. Because, the famous Norman McLean quote, the further you get away from Missoula, Montana, the more assholes there are, has turned out to be true in my political life. And so, now I'm helping advise the Prime Minister of England. And we are building him a campaign right now that in many ways is an extension of the Missoula City Council race.
You've referred to some important mentors in your life. Who are the most important mentors in your experience, and how did you make them want to help you? How did you establish those relationships?
I had 2 amazing professors. I double majored. And so my political science professor, a guy named Bill Chalupka, who's still one of my best friends and just an amazing guy, now is retired and is a professional gambler in Vegas, interestingly enough, and successful at it, weirdly. He literally handed me internship credits anytime I wanted to go work on a campaign and helped me figure out what messaging was. And then very early, on one of my first campaigns, I was a press secretary, and I attacked this campaign manager of our opponent in a primary. And the guy who was the campaign manager who I attacked, the day after the primary, came and met with me and ended up becoming, my biggest mentor ever. He'll be there tonight when I get my award. And he literally sat with me day after day and taught me targeting, taught me how to move message, taught me how to run a legislative race. And there were people like that all over the state who just, taught a skinny kid with a mullet how to do campaigns. And then, another guy who's in Missoula named Jim Flashman, who's ran Montana People's Action forever and is probably the best organizer I've ever met, taught me a very valuable lesson: half gin and half tonic, which isn't a drink, it's how to live your life. It's got to be a little fun and a little work. And if you're not laughing every day at what you do, go find something else, because you won't be good at it. And I'm able to laugh every single day, and people pay me to do it.
You've also worked in the White House and worked on 2 campaigns for President Obama. What is it like to work for a president in the White House?
It's the biggest privilege of my life, being a poor kid from the wrong side of the tracks and getting to work in the White House. The very first day, there's this long tradition that as soon as the president puts his hand on the Bible, they rush one staffer to go get the keys from the previous administration. And they chose me. And so Bush's chief of staff handed me the keys to the West Wing. And I thought to myself, how is this fucking possible? And Bush's chief of staff said 2 things which ended up being very true. The first was that when you walk in this building, you're not a Democrat, you're not a Republican, you're part of a 220-year tradition of protecting this country. And the second thing is, every single day when you come in, the first day it feels normal, quit, because you're jaded. This is not normal, and it's a privilege. And it's really, those 2 things were really true. So it was an incredible privilege, but it's also, in many ways, the hardest thing you've ever done, because the president says this all the time: it doesn't get to us unless no one else can fix it. And so by the time it gets to you, it's just monumentally hard things. I ran the war room for healthcare. I now know why that took 100 years, because it was really hard. I got involved in some very controversial issues when I was there, and those things were just incredibly difficult. But every single day, I would giggle to myself that they were paying me to work 30 feet from the president.
When you were a kid growing up or a student here at the university, did you have a vision for being where you are now? Did you ever imagine you'd achieve what you've achieved?
No, I knew that I wanted to work in campaigns. I knew that's all I would ever do. But if I ever thought I would go to the White House, no way. That just didn't seem obtainable. So no, none of the last 5 years. I honestly think to myself all the time, I'm sure I'm not going to wake up and it's going to be like that Tom Cruise movie where I was asleep the whole time. It's just, no, none of that stuff seemed attainable at the time. It just seemed like too far of a leap. You know, my biggest dream was to be a Senate Chief of Staff. And when I got to be a Senate Chief of Staff, I thought to myself, okay, I've made it. Now I can just, I literally wanted to do that and come back here and teach. Were the things I wanted to do. And then I got to have this whole other life.
What is your best advice about how to succeed in politics or business?
I would say a couple things. One, be the first person to show up in the morning and the last person to leave. When I was young, I wasn't going to get anywhere because I was good looking or because my parents knew somebody. I was going to have to outwork everybody. So I literally had a rule. I was going to be the first one there and the last one to leave. Second thing is all you have is your reputation. So if you say you're going to do X, X has to be what you produce because all anyone's going to base you on is your reputation. If you have kids and your kid's going on a date and 9 people say to you, this guy's great, and one person says to you, he's a dirtbag, you're going to believe the one person. And so you have to have a reputation that people say, like him or not like him, he is a man of his word. And I think that's absolutely crucial. The other thing is you just find out what you're good at and what you love. And if it's selling Subway sandwiches, you'll build a chain of Subway sandwiches. If it's running bars, you'll run great bars. If it's working on campaigns, you'll be a good campaign manager. It's just you have to wake up every single morning saying to yourself, I want to do what I'm doing today. And if you don't, go do something else because life's too short to be miserable. And every single one of us have friends in the room who wake up every day miserable. And they're not doing themselves or their family any favors.
So I'd like to ask a question that's a little bit more about Montana. A number of us students at the UM went to the recent Economic Development Summit in Butte that was hosted by Senator Baucus, and he brought people like Eric Schmidt and Sheryl Sandberg and Elon Musk to Montana. And I've heard a number of business people express, I guess, regret or concern because the senator has decided not to run again, but just concern that the attention maybe and that those types of people coming to Montana, that era may be ending. And I'm wondering if you have any advice on how we can keep that momentum going and stay in the spotlight.
Well, first the bad news. I do think Montana is going to really miss Baucus' seniority, whether you like him politically or not like him. The fact is we get more highway dollars than any state in the country because Max Baucus writes the bill. The fact is we get all these people to come because he's the chairman of the most powerful committee. And so there's going to be a natural change when he goes and retires. But Montana has an unbelievable brand. We are really the last best place. Anyone who comes here once, Eric Schmidt came for a Baucus fundraiser actually 3 or 4 years ago, and now he owns a house in Montana and comes all the time. We are the last best place, and we just have to stay true to that vision and not try to be Texas or California, to be a wild and scenic place that is a good place to be. And I think if we sell that, we will continue to do well economically and move that vision. The other thing we've got to do, I think, a little bit better job is continuing to invest in education. And we are strengthened by our educational system. Our high school graduates come out in the top 2 or 3 in the country. And we got to continue to do that and increase funding to the university and graduate top class, world class students, and they will continue to innovate and do cool things.
So imagine that, I'm sure there may be one in the audience, but if there were a freshman UM student sitting in this audience right now, What advice would you give them so that they can make the most of their time at the UM and also prepare themselves for the jobs of the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the best things that happened to me is I got a true liberal education. The way UM did it then, I don't know if it's still true now, but I took classes across disciplines, and that was incredibly helpful. The average kid graduating today is going to change careers 6 to 8 times, and they're going to have to be very adaptable. And I think you can't think of education as just the thing you do for 4 years when you're 18. You're going to continue to go to school and learn new things. I was taking a Khan Academy class the other night on the plane, trying to learn some new things about something I'm passionate about. We're all going to continue to learn to be competitive to our economic competitors out there. And, that's an important thing to think about. Education can't just last. I also think people who come here and say, okay, I'm just going to take business classes and I'm going to go do business, or I'm just going to take law school classes. This is your one shot to get a true education about a bunch of different things. They made me take statistics, which I hated more than any class I had ever taken. I literally wanted to kill them for making me take that class. But I have used those skills every single day in campaigns, and it turned out to be amazingly great. I took a class on music theory. I've never used that class once in my entire life. But on the other hand, I have appreciation for it, and I'm a little bit better rounded. I think I'm probably, a better person for it. And so take some classes that aren't in your major. Take some flyer classes. I took history of rock and roll. Yes, I took it because I thought it was an easy A, but I learned a bunch of things and fell in love with music. So.
Well, I would like to also give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So we don't have microphones, but if you want to just kind of speak loudly and ask your questions, and we can repeat it so that it will be on audio for the camera.
This might be above your SOFR range, I don't know, but dealing with national debt with $70 trillion, 310 million people in America. Bottom line, each person in this room pulls $50,000. What is going to be done? The administration talks about what they can do about this problem. How high is too high? Because right now, I think they can open-ended checkbook and doing it that way. I don't know how much longer the economy can stay going in this direction. And that's Bush's problem, that's Obama's problem. It started a long time ago. Is there a stop to it?
Well, it's a great question, one that we have to, as a country, grapple with. As you know, when Bill Clinton left office, there was a budget surplus. We're now running huge budget deficits. Part of that's the wars, part of that's the economy, part of that is investments that were crucial to get us out of the economic downturn. The fact is we came out of the economic downturn faster than all of our rivals. We do need to address those issues. We've got some good economic news. As you know, the deficit is growing slower than people projected. Part of that's economic. That's partially why we're having this stalemate we're having right now on the budget. And I do think there's hard choices facing this country that I agree with you completely, that both parties have to grapple with. And both parties are going to have to make some concessions and meet in the middle. And I think, you have a president who wants to do that. And I'm hopeful that, we can do that, because there are huge investments we have to make in education and healthcare. There are some things that I think we're spending money on today that we don't need to. Everyone would agree with that. We all could sit at a table and fix this before lunch. What is failing us right now is our politics. And I think we got to figure out how to deal with that. And I think that'll be the biggest challenge that people who are going to have my job next time are going to grapple with.
Hello, John Berger. Former Congressman Don Manzulu was actually speaking to one of our classes yesterday and brought up Citizens United as well, and explained some of his trepidation of that decision. Could you list your primary concern about that judicial decision?
Yeah. I think that is...
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. Questions about the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision, which allowed, for the first time, treated corporations and individuals, corporations like individuals, and they could have unlimited political voice and spending. So one person could spend whatever they wanted. The federal maximums no longer matter. I think that is the worst decision in recent Supreme Court days. It has changed politics forever. One guy referenced earlier in Las Vegas spent $93 million of his own money. You saw in the Republican primaries, candidates get $10 million checks from people and keep them alive for whole months of the primary season because one person wrote them a check. I think it's going to start to drown out the average citizen's voices. And I'm very hopeful that Congress will do something. Montana, as always, was the big leader on this. As you all know, they decided that they weren't going to go with that Supreme Court decision. They were going to pass their own bill banning corporate spending. It went up to the Supreme Court, and by a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court struck it down and said that they have to go back to the federal rules. And at a presidential level, you can survive that kind of spending because there's so much coverage of the race and et cetera. But in congressional races, the average open seat had $2.3 million of outside spending against every one of the candidates. And that, when you've never heard of some of these candidates, and all of a sudden you're seeing $2 million in ads, you're going to start to believe those things. And I think it really has changed politics in a very bad way, and I'm very concerned about it.
Do you think that the electoral system in America is a fair one, and if not, are there any other electoral systems you see around the world that you think might be more suited?
The question was, I think the electoral system in the United States is the best one, and do I see any others that I think are better? Look, I think this is the best system. I think it was a better system when we didn't have unlimited spending, and I very much worry about that. But I'm helping advise the Prime Minister of England. He can spend 28 million pounds on his entire race. That is a very different model and allows for much more citizen engagement. They also can't buy television ads, which is very different and something I probably don't agree with because I think that ads serve a function to explain people's positions. So I think there are things to learn in every system, but I still think ours is the best.
As someone kind of on the inside, can you talk a little bit about the issues and the people you expect to see at the forefront of the 2016 election?
Yeah, I think the 2016 election is the most interesting in a very long time. It is the first time in 40 or 50 years that you're not going to have except for 08, I guess, an incumbent president or vice president running. I think both parties are wide open. Clearly, Hillary starts out as a big leader in our primary if she runs. If she doesn't run, at least 10 people will announce the next day. There's no front runner in the Republican primaries. I think you will see different issues run on than 08 and 2012, and that'll define this. I also think on the Republican side, they continue to move to the right, and the Tea Party now runs most of their early caucuses and primaries, which will make it difficult for them to get a candidate out of their primary who can be a general election candidate. And this is a problem that both parties faced. We faced it in the 80s before Bill Clinton came. They're facing it now, and it makes it very hard moving forward. The other thing that the hypothetical freshmen we were talking about, we're going to, for the next 20 to 30 years, be in a place that's exactly opposite of when I came into politics, because Democrats now have an inside advantage on the Electoral College, and Republicans had the advantage for about 25 years. And so that will kind of change the way politics is done and give Democrats an advantage until Republicans can fix their problems with young voters. The president got 68% of young voters this time, and with Latino voters, not to mention their huge problems with African Americans and Asians, they're not going to be competitive in a bunch of states. And so that will continue to change. They'll figure it out. It might not be this time, but our system is better if we have two strong parties, and so they'll figure that out. But right now they're having their problems too.
Mr. Messina, my name is Caleb Chestnut, and I was on staff on a statewide campaign in 2012 here in Montana, and I'm a freshman here at the U. And as somebody who's kind of considering, following in the same footsteps as yours, I was just wondering if there's anything that you would do differently as far as your career goes or your education.
Worked out pretty well. No, I mean, Gil, I think it's a great question. I probably would have, I'm sure the professors never going to give me grief about this, but I probably would have taken even more time in college. I was in a hurry, and I didn't need to be. Because you can, Missoula really is the best place. And I could learn a bunch of things on campaigns here. And, but I do think I probably would have partied a little less than I did. I would have felt physically better, maybe.
Choosing to work on a campaign, how do you decide the candidate you're backing has the right kind of values or something you want to promote, or you look at it more of a job and something you care about studies?
Yeah. I got some very good early advice from a friend of mine who said to me, look, in the end, you have to put your reputation on the line with these people too. And so I've spent a lot of time talking to folks before I work for them and just making sure we connect, making sure I believe in them, making sure that I can say to my friends and family, trust in this person. And you have to work too hard in campaigns. You work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week to work for people you don't really like. And so I've really worked hard to only work for people I believe in. And I've been able to do that. And so, I've been lucky. And being from Montana was helpful because we had great politicians that I could believe in. Had I went to the University of Wyoming as a Democrat, it would have been harder because there weren't any Democrats there. I got to be in a place where there, especially in Missoula, where there were tons of Democrats who I could believe in. So I kind of got lucky there.
I have a follow-up question, and because David Cameron is not on the left in his country, and you've been working for left politicians in America, how you chose him, and then maybe you could also explain the role of Prime Minister's questions, which is the main way Americans get to know British politicians in that electoral process.
I had got to know both the current and previous prime ministers of England when I was in the White House, and I had met Cameron, and both he and his opponent asked me to work for them, and so I spent some time. I decided to take a break from American politics just out of exhaustion, but I very quickly missed it and thought it would be fun to do a foreign race, and I really liked Cameron, so I spent a bunch of time with him. And, while I too had some problems getting over the fact that he was a conservative, but being a conservative in England means very different than a conservative here. And he's, to the left of most Democrats on abortion, health care, death penalty, etc. In fact, I was just in Norway giving a speech, and the ambassador asked me to meet with all 7 of the presidential campaigns who were running for president of Norway. And I said, anything you need to tell me. And he said, yeah, all 7 of them are to the left of Barack Obama. And I was like, wow, welcome to Norway. And so, when I started talking to Prime Minister Cameron about the issues, and he's been such a loyal friend to the United States, it was not a very hard choice. And he's a really good guy who I could really believe in.
You described the demographics of the presidential. Yeah. Would you describe that in terms of the House of Representatives? And do you see some changes in the next 4, 6, 8 years in terms of the way the law changes?
I think that the current system that elects members of Congress, redistricting, was, by state, is way too political. I think you're seeing that. The House of Representatives is basically very difficult for Democrats to take over, even though the Democrats have an advantage nationally on party ID because of the way the maps are drawn in places like Texas and Ohio and Florida. And what you're seeing now, state by state, is people are doing citizen ballot initiatives to say no more partisan maps on either side. Let's have the courts just build fair maps. Because part of what you're seeing in Congress is the fact that there are very few swing seats left anymore. I think there's between 20 and 30 actual swing seats now out of 435. And so you have members of both parties never have a re-election. And so they just become very tied to their base on both parties and don't ever talk to the other side. And when I was growing up in the Senate working for Max, in the 90s, you had leaders of both parties who would sit down and figure out how to get the bill passed and pass laws. And now they do that from press conferences. And I think that's been a regrettable evolution. I think redistricting reform will help some of that, because I think we got to get back to a place where people need to work on with both sides.
Are you optimistic about that?
Some places I am. Yeah, Florida just passed it, and their new maps are much better. Texas does not have ballot initiatives, so they can't. But there's court cases going on about that. I think place by place, but I'm not optimistic hugely until the next round in 2018 and 2020.
I was wondering, in your opinion, what do you think needs to happen in our country for more women to be involved in politics and for to achieve fair equal?
Yes, the question is a very good question. The question is, what do we need to get more women in politics? Actually, this is the life's work of this amazing Montanan named Stephanie Shriak. Stephanie Shriak ran John Tester's campaign. She grew up in Butte, America. She's now the head of Emily's List, which is this organization designed to elect women. And she's running this thing called the American President Project, which is trying to get a woman to run for president. And I consult with her a lot on this. And, part of it is that more young women need to say, screw it, I'm going to run. And, they did that. Jeanette Rankin from Montana was the first woman elected to Congress. Dorothy Bradley ran statewide here. Nancy Keenan was a statewide elected official. And we had this huge tradition of strong women, and we need to continue to do that. Women candidates, in recent polling I've seen, are way better candidates because people don't think of them as kind of part of the old boys network in Washington that's been fighting for so long. And so I think a couple things. One, more women need to get involved in politics at my level to kind of be the next Stephanie Shriaks and start running races. And then, Max Baucus decided to run in Missoula for state representative when he was 26 years old. And 4 years later, he was in Congress. People don't do that anymore. And so people here have to go take those shots and start, working on campaigns and running their own campaigns. And I think some of that can get done. I think you're going to see more and more women run and win because of the stalemate in Washington. And, if you look at open seats, women are winning in higher and higher percentages every cycle. And I think they're really talented. I was chief of staff for this woman named Carolyn McCarthy, who's still in Congress. She was the first Democrat to ever hold her seat in 200 years in New York. And she still holds a Republican seat because she's not perceived as a Democrat or Republican. She's perceived as a great leader. And she's a great example of people like that. Not that I'm picking sides, because I love both Vice President Biden and Hillary, but it is factual that if Hillary runs again, more women will get excited about politics.
What lessons do you try to learn during and after a campaign is over from the other side? And what lessons did you learn from Romney's campaign?
It's a great question. After the campaign, there's been a series of political science roundtables at major universities, and I've been able to do, not a debate, but a back and forth with the guy who had my job for Romney. And it's incredibly interesting just to hear the way they processed information. I'm a big believer that you learn more from a loss than you do from a win. Because when you win, everyone thinks you're great, blah, blah, blah. But I really studied kind of losing campaigns. And I think Romney did an amazing job raising money. He beat us on big contributions, which running against an incumbent president is kind of amazing. I also thought he stuck to his message better than any candidate in a very long time. I think his message was flawed. I think it's only the economy. Americans want more than just that. But he really refused to get off that message in a very admirable way. And I think that he kept a very tight circle around him. There wasn't a feeding frenzy of people internally talking to the press, which I admired as well. So I kind of learned all three of those things from him.
Well, our time has come to an end, so I'm wondering if you have any closing thoughts or remarks that you'd like to share?
No, just, you guys are lucky to be going to school in the best place in the world. And so, just study hard, don't party too much, and just, go chase your dreams. If you get to do that, you'll have a great life. And hopefully we can kick the hell out of Portland State tomorrow.
Go Grizz. If you would please join me in thanking Jim Messina for joining us today.